at night, heart won't stop, beating against the mattress all night long. If you've ever held a little bird in your hand or a little animal, its heart's going, your heart's going like that for several nights. 5 years in, top guy in the office, grossing $500,000 a year, got enough money to retire, put that money into technology shares, they shot up, ended up becoming worth a couple of million. I ended up going from keeping the party going and giving my friends drugs to turning it over almost a decade into a big ecstasy dealing business. At the peak of it, I was in competition with the mafia guy, Sammy the Bull Gravano, underboss of the Gambinos, who murdered almost 24 people. And his son had told me he'd been dispatched to take me out to a nightclub, to kidnap me from a nightclub and take me out to the desert one night. So, you know, I fought my case for 26 months. I was the last man standing, and in the end I signed for a plea bargain for 9.5 years. It's first time non-violent drug offender, and I was to serve just under 6 years. And I just get contacted mostly by schools. Years 10, 11 and sixth formers are what I speak to mostly. But I do occasionally get invited to do talks to adults too. If I could tell my younger self something, it would be to make slow and careful progress in life.
My guest this week on Change Your Rituals is a gentleman called Shaun Attwood. Shaun has, he's probably the most inspirational person I've ever met. He's got quite an incredible story to share. Shaun is from the UK, and he grew up in sort of the 1990s in the rave scene, very, very big in the 90s, and decided he wanted to become really successful, make lots of money. And he moved to the US and became a stock market millionaire, made a few million on the stock market in his sort of early 20s, and he started to throw sort of big rave parties out there, and eventually he became an ecstasy distributor, and he went into direct competition with a guy called Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was a big mafia boss. And Shaun told us that there was actually a hit out on Shaun's head where they were going to drive him out to the desert. Shaun basically came out of that, and just as soon as he'd pretty much come out of it, the FBI bashed his door down and incarcerated him in America's toughest prison in Arizona. So Shaun's story was actually featured on the National Geographic channel on Locked Abroad, and which documents his whole story. So be sure to check that out on YouTube. Shaun told us this whole story, and it's quite incredible, really, to think what he went through. He was facing sort of a 200-year maximum jail sentence. I mean, can you imagine that? Didn't think he was probably gonna ever get out, and eventually he signed a plea bargain, and he ended up serving about 6.5 years. I think he was originally sort of put down to 9.5 years after signing that plea bargain, but he served about 6 years, and he told us about his whole story in prison, how tough it was, the likes of which you and I can't even imagine. Telling us about the cockroaches, how he had to wrap himself up in his sheets like a mummified kind of thing, and the sweat was pouring from his body, and the cockroaches are biting him, and well, they don't bite, sorry, they were just all over him, and wow, it was just unbelievable, really. And to think that the problems that you or I have faced, that we complain about in life, and what this guy's been through, being in America's toughest prison, having to watch people get murdered in prison. He's talked to us about that, but he also told us that he read over 1,000 books, which was the key to his rehabilitation, and he read those in prison. He got into yoga, and so I spoke to Shaun really not just about his story, but about his rituals and his habits as well. So yeah, incredible stuff. I'm so grateful for Shaun to actually come and spend that time with us, and we took him out to dinner and things in the evening, which was great. So yeah, really, you're really gonna I hope you take something away from Shaun's story, as we did. And he goes around schools now and actually educates all these children about obviously the bad side of drugs, not to do what he did, and he's just going around all the schools doing this, and it must be, so fulfilling for him to do that. When I was in school, half the guys that ended up in sort of doing armed robbery and things ended up in prison. So it's great that someone like Shaun is who's gone through that experience of being in an Arizona prison, actually educating these children on the bad side of drugs and all that. So I'm going to now leave you with Shaun. I hope you enjoy this episode. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode. So welcome to Change Your Rituals. My guest today is Shaun Attwood. Shaun, you're a best-selling author, activist, public speaker. You've written 5 books, which includes Hard Time, Party Time. You've written a new book called Life Lessons recently. Your episode of Locked Up Abroad was on the National Geographic Channel, and it documents your time in America, where you spent 6.5 years.
5 3/4.
In America's toughest prison in Arizona, for being an ecstasy distributor.
Correct. Yep. Yeah.
Which we'll talk about shortly. You've gained obviously recognition now for your public speaking. You're going around schools around the UK, educating youngsters on the bad side of drugs.
Not to do the stupid things I did.
And you told your story on the BBC, CBS, CNN, Sky, Yahoo, Dow Jones, the Sunday Mirror, the Guardian. Any others, or is it?
There are a few.
Oh, okay.
There's a few more.
Yeah, Shaun, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
No, it's great to have you here. I know a lot of the interviews that I've seen, you obviously speak about your story in America. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Can you just sort of give us just a brief overview of what happened before we sort of go into it?
Well, as a kid living in a small industrial town in the northwest, I used to visit my aunt in Arizona, and coming into the desert on the plane, checking out the houses, the swimming pools as you're landing, and then seeing the sizes of the roads, the cars and all that stuff dazzled me. And I thought to myself, when I finish my education, this is where I'd like to live and work and try and make myself a millionaire. And I got interested in the stock market, perhaps on a natural interest at a very young age. At 14, I started following it. My teacher in economics was explaining how to read the Financial Times and stuff like that. And at 16, I started investing, doubled my money in British Telecom shares. And I just got hooked on the stock market from that young age. And I was telling all my mates in my little town, I'm going to go to America, make $1 million, fly you guys over. So after I did my business degree at Liverpool Uni, I went over to Arizona, got a job right away as a stockbroker. If you've seen Wolf of Wall Street, stockbroking sounds fancy, but if you've seen Wolf of Wall Street, it's glorified telesales. So my first couple of years, I was calling 500 numbers a day. I had to be in the office 6 o'clock in the morning, sales meeting. It was commission only. I wasn't much good at it. And I was living off cheese on toast and bananas and my student credit cards, worried I was going to have to come home because I was running out of money. But 5 years in, top guy in the office, grossing $500,000 a year, got enough money to retire, put that money into technology shares, they shot up, ended up becoming worth a couple of million. I'm only in my 20s, what happens? The money goes right to my head. And I remembered the rave scene in Manchester when it began. It had a massive impression on me. It was news headlines every weekend. It was like a revolution in music, because before that, you had to put a suit on and line up at a nightclub to get in. It was very snooty. But all of a sudden, young people all over the country were breaking into warehouses, airplane hangars, and wearing all this psychedelic clothing and taking this drug called ecstasy. So I've seen it on the news, and I was thinking, yeah, I want a part of that. And a mate out of Manchester took me to the first one, and I did ecstasy, did speed, and kept doing drugs. Thought it was fun at first, which is, it is, and that's why it sucks so many people in, but I ended up going from keeping the party going and giving my friends drugs to turning it over almost a decade into a big ecstasy dealing business. My greed took over, and at the peak of it, I was in competition with the mafia guy, Sammy the Bull Gravano, underboss of the Gambinos who murdered almost 24 people, and his son had told me he'd been dispatched to take me out to a nightclub, to kidnap me from a nightclub and take me out to the desert one night. And the only reason they'd missed us is because one of my mates had got in a scuffle and we'd had to leave that club in a hurry. So having watched Scarface, Pulp Fiction, all these, seeing these celebrity addicts glamorizing the lifestyle, I was thinking I was cool, I was the man, and I'm keeping all this going. But once I got busted, once that SWAT team smashed my door down and I sobered up in the jail, and I looked back and this cloud lifted out my head that I didn't know was there. I was like, how on earth are you still alive? My decision-making processes had been so scrambled, I couldn't see the danger I was putting myself in. And I'd surrounded myself with people who were doing the same thing as me. And I was financing, all of us going off this slippery slope together. And because it happened over the years, and it was so gradual, I didn't notice the level of danger. The New Mexican Mafia was protecting me at one point in time, and they were the most violent, dangerous gang in Arizona, considered at that time. When I first went over to one of their houses, the TV, the big screen TV in the living room had a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on it. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I never stayed in that house for very long. But that was the kind of level I took it to, and the kind of relations I was making at that higher end of the drug distribution business.
So what happened after that?
I met a woman who taught me out of the dealing, and rightly so. I saw the harm drugs cause in the jail, all the guys shooting up and catching diseases and stuff like that. And she said, you're putting us in harm, you're putting our families in harm and stuff like that. And I thought, okay. And I did actually quit about a year before the SWAT team came. But I was naive to the legal system. There's a law called the Statute of Limitations in Arizona. So if you commit a crime, they can come and get you up to 7 years if it's a drug crime after you've committed the crime. And they don't need to catch you with the drugs. All it needs is someone to come forward to say you sold them the drugs within that 7-year period. And there was 10 witness statements given to the police. And then they did a wiretap, and they actually caught me on the phone discussing personal use, which was a crime. It was enough for them to arrest me. And then they arrested over 100 other people from the raves I was throwing, including some of my bouncers and stuff like that. And then there was this big conspiracy case with me as the leader of the conspiracy. Yeah. So I had to accept my karma cheerfully. My first year, I'm resenting getting caught. I'm wanting my old lifestyle back because I was still addicted to the drugs. Yeah. I didn't consider myself an addict. I thought an addict was someone who, sleeps under a bridge, gets up in the morning and shoots up the heroin. Yeah. I'm a party person. I go out on the weekend. I get back to my work on the weekdays. But the therapist said to me, Shaun, an addict's someone who does drugs to the point where it affects their life. Take a look around you right now. Where are you? And I look out the window and there's a gun tower and a guard with a rifle. I'm thinking, all right, maybe drugs put me in here, and maybe me choosing to take drugs put me in here, and I got to take responsibility, and I can't change my past. But seeing the horror of what drug use can lead to, drug addiction can lead to in the jail, made me pledge to myself I will go out and share my story in the hope other young people wouldn't make the kind of mistakes that I did.
Because drug addiction is very, very hard to get over. And when you're in prison, I assume it's just readily available.
There are more drugs in prison than anywhere on the face of the earth. Yeah. So most arrests under the war of drugs in America are for weed. So the young people come in, they graduate to heroin and crystal meth, they make their criminal connections in the prison, and they become proper criminals. And when they get out, they commit more crimes. And it keeps all these private prison industries in business. It's one big racket. But seeing 90% of the guys shooting up heroin and crystal meth, yellow jaundice skin, teeth rotting out, to get treatment for the hepatitis C, which is slowly killing them by eating their livers up, they had to stop taking the drugs. And the whole day revolved around getting the drugs in and keeping high. So they were refusing to save their own lives because they were so addicted. And that is just so sad. And people say, Shaun, why are you saying these things about prisoners? They're paedophiles, they're rapists, they're murderers, they're serial killers. I thought that too. But they're not. The media, all they ever do is report extreme crimes and then say how easy it is. They've all got PlayStations and gourmet food. Yeah. But once I got in there, because prior to my arrest, I thought prisoners lock them up and throw away the key. It is rapists and paedophiles and serial killers. But once they got in there and saw it was the warehousing of non-violent drug offenders, people with addiction issues, young people, because it's mostly young people who experiment with drugs, people of colour, the racism is off the scale. If you're black or Latino, you're 4 times more likely to get arrested for the same crime as a white person in America. A lot of my friends in there were soldiers, ex-Marines. They'd come back from the Middle East, PTSD, couldn't get back to society properly, integrate, and they'd gone to street drugs to medicate. So the police and the prison were started to keep people away from society that were hurting other people. And that is, you know, paedophiles, robbers, murderers. That's how crime has been defined for millennia. But in the last year, because of drugs laws, that has been completely subverted. Prisons now are warehouses for people with addiction issues and the mentally ill, and the people they're hurting are themselves. And what do? Society throws them in prison, treats them like animals, traumatizes them all the more, and they just keep doing the hardest drugs possible so they can get out of their brains and not think about all this while they're in the prisons. It's a massive disaster for the taxpayers.
The prisons, are they essentially almost like a business? So the states receive money for the number of prisoners they actually have, so there's not really any incentive for them to, I suppose, you know, get people out and get them back on track in society.
Exactly. The states receive The states receive money to arrest as many people as possible. Now, who are you going to arrest under those circumstances? The police say going out and arresting young people smoking weed is like shooting fish in a barrel. The police say going into these black neighbourhoods and arresting these black people smoking crack is like shooting fish in a barrel. They can get all their quotas of arrests, and then they get extra money if the arrests are for drug arrests as well. And that comes from the federal government. So there's an incentive to just go out and arrest all these non-violent drug offenders. And if you look at the history of this, the rate at which murders have been solved has gone down in proportion to all the police resources being taken up with these drug arrests. I'll give you an example in the UK. Fred West, serial killer. You guys familiar with him?
Yeah.
He got away with it so long with killing these people because he was snitching out drug dealers. He was playing into that philosophy of the police going after the drug dealers. Yeah.
So just going back to your story and situation, so you got caught and it was initially they charged you for 200, or wanted to put you away for 200 years at first, and then they looked at offering you a plea bargain.
Yeah.
So what did that kind of
Okay, the whole justice system, as well as the war on drugs, is a business model, like you pointed out. As well as them getting $50,000 a year of taxpayers' money per prisoner, they want the prisoners to sign guilty as soon as possible in the remand jail and get over to the prison system. The remand jail is like a conveyor belt to the prison system. And to do that, they make the conditions as hard as possible in the jail, so it breaks you down psychologically. 98% of the prisoners in Arizona sign plea bargains just to get over to the prison system. Now, the prosecutors are like used car salespeople. So to add that, to increase that psychological pressure on the unsentenced inmate, what they do is they say every charge you've got carries such and such a sentence. If you go to trial and lose, we will stack all of your charges up and give you the maximum aggravated. In my case, I had 20 plus charges. Each one carried 5 to 10 years. So if I went to trial and lost, they could stack it all up to a maximum 200-year sentence. It costs the state tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, to go to trial. So they don't want to spend that money. If every prisoner in America exercised their right to go to a trial, it would completely bankrupt the justice system. So, you know, I fought my case for 26 months. I was the last man standing, and in the end I signed for a plea bargain for 9.5 years, as first-time non-violent drug offender, and I was to serve just under 6 years. My attorney actually got me a loophole for people who are not US citizens as well, which kind of shaved a little bit more off it for me. Yeah.
What did it sort of each charge carry? Because each one was 200 years.
Okay, I had 20 plus charges.
Yeah.
So each charge carried 5 to 10 years. And when I say it carried 5 to 10 years, that means the presumptive sentence would be 5 years.
Yeah.
the aggravated maximum would be 10.
Right.
So if I went to trial and lost on all 20 counts and they gave me the super aggravated maximum, 20 times 10, 200 years. And I saw a person in there with a drug case similar to mine who took it to trial. He refused to sign a plea bargain for, I think it was like 15 years, and he got 200 years.
So any of the people that went down at the same time as you that you were working with, is anyone still in the system as it were, or has everyone kind of made their way out?
Okay, I had over 100 co-defendants, and there was very little evidence of the actual drug dealing that we did as a conspiracy because I'd finished that business. And the evidence against us had only been, on the wiretaps, had only been gathered in the last 6 or 7 months or something like that. But they did catch most of them talking about personal use. And some of them just signed plea bargains to say they were guilty and then got fines and stuff like that. A lot of them just got that. I mean, we're talking about university students. Some of them were just called up to buy pills on their phones. People like that were SWAT team raided and then hauled in court. The ones that they said were at the top of the conspiracy got the most time. Wildman, who was my best friend from my hometown, he was protecting me in the jail. He's like 25 stone, his nose is pointing over here. He's got human teeth marks all over his fists from all the fights he's been in. He's a good man to get arrested with, actually. He had been deported several times from America, and I'd smuggled him back in. So he was classified as a menace to society. I had like Mission Impossible style teams of people smuggling him through Mexico and stuff like that to get him back in. He actually ended up serving slightly longer than me. I got the longest sentence. I signed for felony 3s and 4s. Wildman signed a year before me. His plea bargain was for felony 2s, which is more serious. And because of his track record, he did end up serving, I think, almost a year longer than me. Since then, some of my mates over there have continued to do drugs, and they're in and out of prison, or 1 or 2 of them usually dies each year as well, who's still involved in drugs. Yeah.
So, if Wildman had not been in there protecting you, he protected you.
Yeah.
How would what would have happened? Like,
if I'd have gone in there without my co-defendants, heaven help me, it's just raw survival of the fittest. I mean, look at me, I'm a skinny, nerdy business graduate from the UK, and you've got all these big, tattooed gang members looking at you through the plexiglass like you're the fresh meat. They actually call them the fresh fish.
fresh, like Shawshank.
Like Shawshank, exactly. You know, it's just like that. They're looking at you, and they're pre-selecting who they're going to rape, who they're going to rob, and do all these range of bad things to. So, because I had so many people arrested with me, including some of my bouncers, including Wildman, and there was another guy in there who was 6.5 foot, who was really big built as well. It was more a case of us just getting used to the sounds of the heads getting bashed against the toilets and the bodies getting thrown around, and seeing people getting carried out on stretchers look like they were dead, as opposed to us experiencing them. And I was with my co-defendants for the first year or so, but after that I did get separated from them. I did get attacked, but after that, writing became my currency, and I started to write the life story of a mafia mass murderer called Two Tonys, who'd left the dead bodies of rival gangsters from Arizona to Alaska. He was doing 141 years. Now, if you've only murdered rival gangsters, you're top of respect in the prison. If you've murdered a woman or a child, it's KOS, kill on sight. The prisoners try and kill those prisoners when they come in. So because Two Tonys had only murdered rival gangsters, he was at the top of the respect. And I had a game of chess with him, and he said he felt like I was an honest person. He said on the road of life, he'd had to be a quick judge of character to stay alive. And he knew I was a writer. And right there, I'd only just met him, and he says to me, "Would you write my life story?" And I said, "Yeah, I feel honoured." And I started to go into his cell every day for months on end. I wasn't allowed in there, but he positioned prisoners outside to watch for guards. And spending these months with him, we grew so close that by the end of it, he said he felt like I was the son that he'd never had. And I never got attacked again. after 2 Tonys, took me under his wing. And that's his life story. That's the book I've just finished and I've just submitted, so that's going to be my next book out. Yeah.
How did you avoid joining a gang?
You can't avoid the gangs, but to join the gang, you have to commit acts of violence.
Right.
And to be a full member, you have to murder someone in the jail for them. Here's how it works. In America, it's gangs based on race. In the UK, it's gangs by area. So, for example, it might be London versus Manchester. But it's all racial gangs over there. And in Arizona, the 4 biggest were the whites, blacks, Mexicans, Mexican Americans. So, as I'm white, as soon as I walked in, Aryan Brotherhood sent someone up to me, a few guys actually, and they're like, "What are your charges? What are your charges?" Now, I don't understand my charges. I've woke up that morning, I've got this little charge sheet. It says like crime syndicates, electronic device in drug transaction, conspiracy. It's all this legal terminology, you know. I'm an educated person, but I've not got a degree in law, business studies. So I said to the gang, "Oh, I don't know what my charges are." Like, "What do you mean you don't know what your charges are? You a chomo? You a chomo?" I don't know what a chomo is either. So I'm digging my own grave now. These guys have got me up against the wall about to do something to me. And I just don't know how to respond or behave in this situation. I'm crapping it. And in the end, I pulled out my little charge sheet and I showed it to them. And they looked at it and they were like, "God damn, $750,000 bond?" That was my bail. Like, "Who did you kill?" And I explained it was drug charges and I threw raves. And they liked that I had such a high bond, a bail. And they left me alone after that. Most people are in there because of the drug charges, so that's an acceptable crime. Now, if there's a meeting, or what's called a white boy meeting, all the whites in the pod have to go to that meeting or you will get smashed. That's one of the gang rules. They explain the rules to you as soon as you come in. If someone calls you a punk, a bitch, or hits you, you have to fight that person on the spot, or else they'll smash you. You have to take showers, or they'll smash you for bad hygiene. Can't go making friends with the guards, they'll smash you for snitching. Can't go sitting at the tables of other races. There's all these rules you got to follow. And the gang hierarchy is such that under the leaders, there's these guys called torpedoes. They'll go in and smash someone, no questions asked, just so they can earn tattoos, and that enhances their reputations. They're looking to make their bones, basically, off somebody. And like I said, the more serious the violence, the higher up in the gang hierarchy are the tattoos that they earn. Aryan Brotherhood prison gang, to get the Warbird to be a full member, you have to murder someone in jail for them. Yeah. So because there was so many of us in there looking out for each other, we were one of the biggest groups in the remand jail the first 26 months. We protected each other, and I never got attacked during that period. And I tried to turn it into the educational opportunity of a lifetime. You know, someone said to me, reading would improve my writing. I thought reading was frivolous before I got arrested, and in just under 6 years, I read over 1,000 books. I used to think I knew everything, and then started reading, and I realised I knew nothing, and there's all this information out there, and I went on this fantastic journey through literature. And that changed my worldview. I felt all my conditioned belief system just melting off me. And I read a lot of the original texts in philosophy and psychology as well, and that helped me go inside myself to understand the root causes of what had led to me taking drugs, and to build a framework with the help of the therapist to not go back to that behaviour.
What sort of habits and rituals did those sort of books help you adopt in terms of positive, to change things?
Perhaps the biggest one that's really took over my life is yoga and meditation. Yeah. My sister sent me this book called Yoga Made Easy when I'm in this remand jail in my first year, surrounded by these tattooed gang members with neo-Nazi swastikas and all this stuff on them. And I hid the book right under my mattress because I didn't want these guys to think I was a sissy and start picking on me. So in the end, my sister's like, "Have you tried yoga yet? Have you tried yoga yet?" And I did try it, and just to get her off my back. And I did this flow of postures, and I lay down in corpse pose at the end after doing like cat, dog, forward bend, side stretch. And then I'm laying down on the floor. I waited until my cellmates were gone so they wouldn't see me. Like in corpse pose like this. And I'm feeling all the stress and tension just melt out my shoulders. Yeah. I thought to myself, my God, I used to take ecstasy and other drugs to feel like this. You could do this naturally. And because I've got this addictive personality, manic energy trait, if something feels good, I'm going to throw my energy into it. And that's what I started to do. And when I got moved in with the cockroaches and the murderers in maximum security about a year in, where I was pushed to the brink of suicidal insanity, couldn't sleep with the cockroaches crawling on me. At 8 o'clock at night, we were locked in our cells, and the cockroaches would line up in the cracks in the walls in this old building, like an army about to invade with their antennae sticking out. And then as soon as the lights went out, then that was it. They would just flood the room. It was all over. And this was one of the hardest parts for me, because even more worse than the violence was just trying to get to sleep with them. What I did was, in the beginning, I wrapped the sheet around me and left a breathing hole so I looked like the mummy, and the sheet would keep them off me. But the sheet traps the heat to your body. This is the Sonoran Desert. Phoenix is the hottest of the big cities in America. It gets up to almost 50 degrees and it's hot all year round. So when you wrap this sheet around you, when you mummify yourself, the sheet traps the heat, and you've got all these bleeding and itching skin infections and bed sores from the heat. Anyway, I mean, it's so hot that your skin turns soggy, the outer layers of it, and you get this itchiness, and you scratch yourself and clumps of your own skin just come off under your nails. And I had these skin infections. It looked like I'd spilt battery acid on my leg, one of these skin infections. So in the end, the trapped heat is so unbearably itchy you can't possibly sleep. You end up just throwing the sheet off you and letting these insects crawl on you. Now, fortunately, they don't bite. They actually became my friends over the months. I became very familiar with the habits of cockroaches. As they come out at night, they start to tickle your feet. They start to tickle your legs. They tickle your hands. I mean, I woke up so many nights with them tickling my hands. To this day, if anyone tickles my hands, I flinch because I just go back to that. They try to get in your ears to eat your earwax. It's like honey to them. Either you guys asthmatic? No. I had a neighbour who was asthmatic, and he wakes up one morning out of breath, grabs his inhaler. There's one in there. He takes a blast, projects cockroach inside himself from this inhaler, just blasts it down his windpipe. He starts freaking out, saying he can feel it moving around. And he pukes, but it somehow it's stuck inside him and it wouldn't even come out. Yeah. The prisoners were doing cockroach races, gambling on the winner.
I've seen that in films, I think, or something. Yeah.
Oh, I would just be lying there at night and they're just swirling around on the ceiling. Every now and then one of them just drop off. And they can drop great heights and it doesn't do anything to them. They just continue circling around the cell. And I got familiar with how the family structure is. There's like the mother ones or the pregnant ones have these little capsules that they're like worms, and then they lay them on your books, and then they pop open and all the little babies come out, and there's little white ones running around and like albino cockroaches. I
remember I was in Australia when the Sydney Olympics were on, and there's places, I don't know if you've been there.
No,
I was there for about 6 months, and some of the places just infested with cockroaches. Well, I was working in a youth hostel, and I remember I saw like a load of them. I tried to kill them with some cooking oil spray. Yeah. It's like, they're horrible things.
They are indestructible. Yeah. If you try to drown them, they actually condense into this formation where they look dead, but they're actually holding oxygen to themselves. So you think, drown this little git, when really it's outsmarting you. It holds this oxygen to itself, and then it reformulates. It just comes back to life later on. I mean, the mechanisms by which these things survive are really impressive. Yeah.
So, in terms of like, did you just adjust to it basically? Like first night, obviously, it was just a worst nightmare, but you just over time.
First night, heart won't stop, beating against the mattress all night long. If you've ever held a little bird in your hand or a little animal, its heart's going, your heart's going like that for several nights. But people say, you know, Shaun, you was in this jail that had these brutal things going on. You know, I wouldn't have been able to survive it, man. Props to you. And I say, yeah, you would be able to survive it because there's something inside the human that comes out during difficult circumstances, this ability to adapt. And the people who say that to me, that they wouldn't survive it, they wouldn't know about that because they hadn't been in that kind of a situation. But once they got into that kind of a situation, this thing that enables us to adapt comes out. For example, as soon as you get in a situation like that, where you know you're in a holding cell in the beginning, fights are breaking out, blood splattering over everybody, guards are like pulling people out, and all the things you think about in the everyday life, all your thought processes that you've had since you were a kid, shut down, they're out the window. It becomes raw survival. Your brain then starts to focus on who can hurt me and who can I make alliance with that will protect me. And if you lay low, you know, some of my most successful videos on YouTube are my prison survival advice videos, and I tell the new prisoner who's going in, lay low, don't go in there bragging and stuff like that. Take your time, figure out who's who. Because one of the keys to not getting beat up, if you're a skinny, nerdy guy like me, is to make alliances with the right people. And that might not necessarily be the gang members, these big tattooed guys who come up to you in the beginning. They might just be the lower level foot soldiers. Yeah. Some old guy, like two Tonys with his glasses on, 60 years old, sat in his cell reading the book, who looks like he wouldn't harm anyone. Yeah. He might be the guy running the whole show.
I mean, how did you deal with fear? Like, did it just make you mentally tough in there? And is it kind of, you know, today can you just confront anything, basically? Is it just, you know?
I've dwelled on fear and anxiety a lot because the most violence I ever experienced wasn't from the mafia, wasn't from the prison gangs, wasn't from any of this stupid stuff I did in America. I was a kid, I just passed my driver's license test and I went to fill up my mum's little red car with petrol, and I got attacked by 4 drunks, and I thought it was brave to stand up to them. It was a big mistake. They started kicking me in the head, hitting me in the face with an iron bar, knocking pieces of my teeth out, and it got so painful I curled up into the fetal position, and I thought to myself, as I started to see stars and as the pain was going away, even though they were still hitting me, I thought to myself, this is what dying feels like. These guys aren't trying to beat me up, they're trying to kill me. And I was actually going unconscious. I thought I was dying, I was going unconscious, and I woke up in a pool of blood, bits of teeth missing. They'd smashed the car windows. And because of that, I had fear and anxiety. And when I went out to clubs, I won't go up and talk to women, I won't go up and dance, I was too self-conscious. But when I took ecstasy, all that melted away. I talked to everyone, I wouldn't stop dancing, I'd make friends with people all night long. So as I went on this inner journey to figure out why I was taking drugs, I realized I had this anxiety and fear. And I thought to myself, you know, you've never been able to go out sober and just enjoy yourself. You've never been happy in your own skin. But then suddenly, living with a lot of people that some of them I would have crossed the road to avoid, living where there was violence almost every day, it kind of crushed some of that fear and anxiety out of me. A lot of it perhaps because these days I feel confident enough to go out, and I've been to a few raves and stuff like that and danced all night without any drugs or alcohol, and just completely enjoyed myself in my own skin, something I thought I would never ever be able to do in my entire life. So it's interesting, isn't it? Can that fear and anxiety be beaten? I still get a little bit of it every now and then when I do a talk. First time I spoke to the school kids, I was so scared I couldn't even eat my breakfast. I paced like a prisoner in a cell at the front of the room, soaked in sweat, this raw, nervous energy's crackling off me. But I've got more used to that now. Occasionally when I speak in front of the adult audiences, that gets the big anxiety going up a little bit more. But again, it's just practice. I would say getting up in front of these audiences has also helped me address my fear and anxiety, as well as the whole prison experience being forced to live with all these guys sober who are doing these crazy, dangerous things, a lot of them. Those two things combined I would credit with helping me deal with fear and anxiety.
Just going back to when you came home, how did you restart your life after going through all that, coming back home, moving back home with your parents, and what happened?
Coming back home, I was blessed to have such good family support. A lot of the prisoners that I'd met had been disowned because of repeated involvement in drugs. And to go home and to my mum and dad, and my mum said I was like a puppy dog following around the house waiting for orders because I was institutionalised. I was on the dole. I couldn't get a job because of my criminal record. The dole would just tell me to go and lie about it. Don't tell anyone you got a criminal record or you're never going to get hired. I told the mental health team I'd been on and off medication in prison, and they said to me that I needed to keep the medication. And I said, look, here's what happens in prison. It drives you mental. You know, I had to fall back on it because I felt suicidal at some points. And I feel perfectly normal now. And they said, no, Shaun, when you feel normal, a person like you, that's grandiosity. We're going to double your medication and start doing home visits. They were about to section me. And I moved down south and my medical file mustn't have been transferred. And I never heard from them again after that. But I got down south because there's far more career opportunities. And once I was able to channel my energy into the public speaking and the writing and really get that going, gave me a purpose and added meaning to my life, that helped me mentally heal from what the prison experience that I'd put myself in. Some of the kids say to me sometimes, Shaun, you come in here and you're describing all this stuff, aren't you reliving it? And you know what, I held it in that those drunks had almost killed me from a teenager and didn't share it with anyone. And that caused me an anxiety that lasted for 10 plus years. So now I feel karmically as well, especially that by sharing it with the young people and getting all the feedback from them afterwards, it makes me feel that I am doing a good thing and balancing that karma out, but it also helps me deal with it therapeutically because I'm sharing it.
How are these children reacting to you in the schools? I mean, you must be getting all sorts of different reactions. They must really literally be like, they're noisy at the start, but then when you tell them the story, they must just go completely silent, just completely mesmerised by it.
Well, I speak at a range of schools. In prison, we call drugs the great equaliser because it brings people from all walks of life together into the prison system. So ranging from schools like Croydon, Hackney, where they look at me, like some of these gang members look at me like, who's this guy coming in here? To schools like Westminster and Stowe, where they've got the money to buy drugs. What happens is, once it gets into the jail conditions, these kids get on the edges of their seats. And I don't go in and preach at them. And I just say, hey, here's what happened to me. And at the end, I do give a summary of all of the negative consequences of drugs in the context of my life. And the teachers tell me, the kids who stay behind to ask me the questions are the hardest to reach students. I even get parents requesting to meet me. Parents say stuff like, Shaun, we're lucky if we can get a grunt off our kid when he comes home from school. After your talk, he wouldn't shut up about it. And it was the first time we could sit down and talk to our kid about drugs. When I was a kid, they showed me a video of eggs frying and said, this is your brain on drugs. And they had this Just Say No campaign. So when I went out and tried drugs and had fun doing so, I thought I'd been lied to and I didn't understand the true nature of what I was getting into. And I'd rather someone had explained it to me honestly and showed me that whole road of drug use. It's a very long one. First time you do drugs, pleasure's high, pain's low. Each time you do drugs though, you're always chasing that early high and the pleasure's never the same, it slowly goes down. But the pain slowly goes up in the background and it creeps up until the point where it bypasses the pleasure and then you're addicted. For the people who do get addicted, like the people in the jail. And that's what made me realise it was seeing those people in the jail unable to stop taking the drugs to get treatment to save their own lives. And then I felt ashamed of putting people on that road. I probably got took off that road halfway down it when the SWAT team smashed my door down. And I thank them for saving my life. If I'd kept going down it, I probably ended up dead.
If the FBI hadn't have not bashed your door down, how would life be different, and what would you be doing? Like, what do you think?
Had you just gone back to day trading at that point? Had you?
I had gone back to day trading, yes, but I was still going out on the weekends doing personal drug use.
Right.
So that put me in that community of gangster people and drug users and the night people, and anything can happen in that community. And like I mentioned earlier, Sammy the Bull Gravano had a team out headed by his son looking for me. But I thought that was a buzz and that was fun, that was cool at the time because the drugs was telling me so. But once I got off the drugs, it was like, you're probably going to end up dead if you'd have kept going. Yeah.
In terms of your daily life now, do you have any, I suppose, routines on a daily basis or weekly basis that you kind of, I suppose, stick to keep everything on track?
The yoga that I started in the jail, that my sister insisted on me starting, and that I resisted, has completely taken over my whole life. I watch what I eat now. I do a bit of yoga in the morning, sets me up for the day, and do a lot of like yoga workshops, retreats, all this kind of stuff, and it just changes the way you think about the world and how what you do influences other people, and how that the effect can reciprocate on yourself. Besides that, two Tonys also taught me how to appreciate life and the small things. One of his favourite books was A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Ivan is in the Russian Gulag under the Stalin era. They're working these guys to death, basically. They're expendable. It's so cold, your spit freezes mid-air. The prisoners are losing ears, noses, digits, fingers, toes to frostbite. And every day is just raw survival. They're fighting over like fish eyeballs in the soup. And whenever the prisoners complained about anything, where we were at, like the breakfast call in the morning, two Tonys would be like, how can you be complaining that your waffles are cold in the morning when, where Ivan, what was that? If he got an extra fish gill in his fish eyeball soup, he'd be happy as could be. So I used to look for trouble in all of the wrong places because I didn't appreciate the small things. Two Tonys taught me that. Might sound bizarre that a mafia mass murderer taught me that, but he did. He had a good side as well. And, I wake up with a smile on my face now because free in the West, no dead rats in my food, no cockroaches in my bed. I've lost everything and regained my life. And you appreciate then the little things that you took for granted before you got arrested. So yeah, again, I credit incarceration for teaching me all these things.
Where are you going with your talks with schools? Are you looking to do more sort of personal development, talking to adults? Do you do anything in sort of London, where the gang culture is quite in East London, those sort of places? And
I've kind of just been going with the flow of the whole thing. Yeah. When I started out about 5 years ago, I advertised it, but now it has a momentum of its own. And I just get contacted mostly by schools. Years 10, 11 and sixth formers are what I speak to mostly. But I do occasionally get invited to do talks to adults too. Yeah. So I generally just go with whatever comes in. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And it keeps expanding. I did about 150 talks in the last academic year. Right. Yeah.
Almost every other day.
Did 3 schools in one day.
Wow.
I started out in Southampton and then Guildford and then Stowe in the evening. Yeah.
Can you can't, so you literally can't go into, can you go into Europe and speak to schools there?
Yeah, I have done a few talks in Europe. I actually was in Belgium last year at a conference hosted by Sodexo, which is a private prison, but one of the more ethical private prisons as far as what I've been researching about them. And the fact that they reached out to me, a prisoner, to get my input into their policy, I think that was a really good sign. So we're unusual things like that come along, and if I can give my input and it helps make the world a better place for young people or prisoners, that's really been what I've been motivated to do.
You obviously read, like you said, a lot of books in prison.
Yeah.
You mentioned one just now, but what would you say your top 3 most influential books be that you
Yeah.
read, perhaps?
Are you talking about top 3 that I enjoyed, or top 3 from an intellectual perspective that influenced me and benefited me in terms of learning things about life?
I think
The second,
that one.
The latter.
Yeah.
I would say the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, especially if you are in prison, because Marcus Aurelius is like, be like the promenade against which the waves are bashing, but your mind remains sound and hard, and the waves aren't affecting it. And Epictetus was formerly a slave, and he became a philosopher and was freed, I think, by his master. And it's all really about being mentally strong in harsh conditions. These are ideal for people in difficult situations, especially for prisoners. Quotes like know yourself, like Socrates. You know, people, it sounds simple, but people are zipping through life, especially if you're living in a city like London. I was working the stock market. I was just rushing through life, not thinking about my actions. But if you take time out to go inside yourself and analyze what the hell's going on in there, you know, it can really be beneficial to you mentally, and to you just having that mental health in your future, because people don't do it. And if you can understand the mechanics of how your brain works and your thoughts work, things like why I was taking the drugs are then addressed. So going inside yourself, I think, is one of the most important things that people can do, but people don't make time to do it. Nietzsche, I was really big on reading Nietzsche, and he says, you know, stuff like live your life like a work of art. Look at how much time people put into a work of art. But imagine if you put all that time and effort into how you live your life, how you could improve your life. Nietzsche's been misinterpreted and misquoted and associated with the Nazis because Hitler issued his books to his soldiers. But if you actually look beyond that and read his philosophy, it is about life affirmation. So the main ones for me were these big name philosophers. Reading them, taking that stuff on board, helps me deal with situations. I'll give you another quote. We are disturbed not by things, but by the views that we take of them. I think that was Epictetus or someone like that. And basically he's saying, people can call me names all day long like they do in prison, and you know, people who they get picked on the most. Yeah. But it's up to us to choose our reaction. And I didn't understand that at all. I thought if someone picks on me, I need to react, you know. So all hell can be breaking loose around you, but you have total control over your reaction. And that then absolves the people who are picking on you. You then can't blame them for your mood swings, which is what happens. You know, a lot of people are down on themselves because someone said something bad about them. It's irrelevant. Your reaction is what counts. So learning little things like that, and it all added up to this framework that, with the help of the therapist, was put in my head to, you know, make it so that I wouldn't fall back on drugs by getting stressed out. Basically, that was the bottom line. Yeah.
What your views are on kind of current drug laws, both in the UK and the US, and perhaps, you know, the rest of the world, where
I can prattle on about this for a long time. I'm presently writing a book about the war on drugs. And I'm not trying to make it an apology for what I did. It's come about because all of the books on the war on drugs I've read are by journalists, and they're people looking into a world that I was part of. So I felt I had some extra information to offer to the world. Now, researching the history of drug laws, you know, prior to this book, I assumed drug laws were introduced to stop people taking drugs, because drugs hurt people and they didn't want people harming themselves. Boy, was I wrong. Drug laws were introduced because certain corporate interests around the early 1900s wanted to eliminate their competition. I'll give you one example, would be the pharmaceutical societies which put up the very first money to lobby for drugs laws, especially marijuana, because they didn't want people growing medicine in their own backyards for free. Plastics, DuPont, feared hemp products. William Randolph Hearst, he had investments in forests, millions invested. A machine called a decorticator was about to enable hemp products to be mass produced on an industrial scale. So all these industries, petrochemicals, the beginning of big pharma, plastics, were terrified of this competitive threat. One of the bankers that was financing these industries, Andrew Mellon, became the Treasury Secretary for the US federal government. And he put his future son-in-law, Harry Anslinger, as one of the first drug czars. And this guy remained a drug czar for decades. This Harry Anslinger was massive racist. I mean, he was making statements like, big-lipped blacks on cocaine, all they want to do is rape white women. And if you shoot a black on cocaine, a regular bullet won't kill him. The police got so scared, they actually got bigger caliber bullets to shoot blacks on cocaine because they had superhuman strength. Harry Anslinger said jazz music was the work of the devil and marijuana would make young people turn violent, and they put out videos of a young lad smoking weed, getting an axe and killing his parents. So immediately then, they caused hysteria through the media, because William Randolph Hearst, he was the media tycoon, he was like the Rupert Murdoch of the day. He put out all these headlines with this racist nonsense. And the public were just in absolute uproar over it. And that's how they got support for the Marijuana Tax Act. They said, let's call it marijuana because people don't know what that means. We'll say it's this new evil drug from Mexico. Even hemp farmers who were in support of the Marijuana Tax Act didn't know that they were putting themselves out of business by yeah. So Harry Anslinger was very crafty and very powerful. He had the full backing of the industrialists. And over the decades, he tightened this up to introduce the whole world to signing on to his drug laws through the United Nations. Yeah. Marijuana is illegal in most countries around the world, including the UK, because of what this big-time racist forced upon us. And he said to all the countries around the world, if you don't sign up for this, America won't trade for you through the United Nations. And to this day, Obama has maintained weed as a Schedule I drug, as harmful as heroin, and more harmful than cocaine. Because with no medicinal value at all, yet marijuana is the most medicinal plant on the face of the earth. And when I say that, I'm not saying everyone should go out and smoke it and will get these health benefits from it. No, not at all. I'm talking about people with cancer who are about to die. They're in chemotherapy and they can't eat. And the marijuana stimulates the appetite. There's parents out there whose children are having hundreds of seizures a week and they're at risk of going into comatose and dying. And yet on marijuana, hemp, it stops all that and saves their lives. This guy in Wales just got busted growing a pot plant. He's got some terminal illness, he was in agony. And the police went in there and you know, the police in this country are saying that they haven't got the money to investigate all these political paedophiles. And they're out busting sick people growing plants that can help them with their own pain. The whole system needs to be relooked at. This is why I'm against the war on drugs. And the people who put the best arguments out for these drug laws being eliminated are the police. And I'm talking about law enforcement against prohibition. Brilliant speakers, and if you go on YouTube and look at any of their videos, they say, look, I joined the police to go after murderers, robbers, rapists, paedophiles. That's how crime has been defined for millennia. Now all my time is taken up arresting non-violent drug offenders. It's turned society against the police because so many people take drugs. And most of the arrests under the war on drugs are weed. The government's saying, oh, we're out arresting the Pablo Escobars of the world, the El Chapos of the world. It's absolute nonsense. At the peak of the war on drugs, a young person was getting arrested every minute with weed. So what was happening? These kids were then getting thrown in a jail where they could get raped, where they could get murdered. And this was happening so much in America that the parents got sick of it. And this is why one of the reasons why you've got all these states decriminalising now. Parents don't want their kids getting thrown in these places where they could get murdered and raped and get introduced to the hardest drugs. Heroin, crystal meth. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for society or the taxpayers, but all these corporations are making money off the back of it, and they're lobbying and putting all this money up to both political parties, the main political party, whichever gets in power, to keep all these contracts going. And researching further into the history of marijuana in particular and how it's been used for thousands of years as medicine, and hemp oil especially, it can cure cancer from the research that I've been reading. On the way up here today, I was listening to a documentary about the endocannabinoid system and how the cannabinoids in marijuana operate, and they go in and fight cancer cells. They cause the cancer cells to commit suicide, and they don't destroy any of the tissue around them. Yet people who are getting this hemp oil, it's illegal, and they're getting arrested, and they're not allowed to try and save their own lives. I'm talking about people like Rick Simpson. He had skin cancer, and he cured it just by putting hemp oil on the lesion. Yeah, and he ended up in trouble with the police, and he's in Eastern Europe now, and he's talking widely about it. So the drug laws were based on racism. They're an anachronism. They've caused millions of young people to end up in prison. Over 1 million young people in this country have got weed convictions, can't get jobs, weren't dealing. And it just all needs to be reversed. And I'm not saying everyone should go out and take drugs. I'm saying to young people especially, stay away from the drugs because of what the bad things it leads to that happened in my life. But if you look around the world, the countries that have got the most punitive drug laws have got the biggest drug problems. The countries that have got sensible drug policies have got the opposite. Once you take the buzz out of drugs, the illegality, because I used to buzz on this cops and robbers thing, you know, driving around. Once you take that out, the rush is gone. It's boring then. You know, some of the kids don't want to do it.
What you would tell your younger self in terms of like 19, 20 years old, what would you tell him? Like,
if I could tell my younger self something, it would be to make slow and careful progress in life. I started following the stock market as a kid. Didn't have any money. Made this pledge to myself that I was going to make $1 million. There's nothing wrong with making money as long as you do the right thing with it. And I derailed because I saw the law of the excitement and the fast cash of getting into the drugs game. And if I hadn't have derailed, you know, I would have achieved my dream and been really successful in that and living happily, and wouldn't have put myself at risk of going through, you know, this environment where I could have possibly got killed. So to young people, I would say, if you've got a dream at your age, if you persevere from this young age, and people are going to try and trip you up and set you back, it doesn't matter. Just keep making that slow and careful progress in life, and you won't step on any of the mines that I stepped on.
Sure. Where can people get hold of you?
My blog is John's Jail Journal. My YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, everything else is just under my name, Shaun Attwood.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. You got any more questions? Okay. That's been really, really great having you. It'd be great to have you back again.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go for a curry now.
The first thing I did when I got out of prison, went for a curry.
Yeah. Not me to the one. Thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Cheers. Yeah, thank you.